On behalf of the Institute on National Affairs, which is funded by the government and the student body, tonight's events have been co-sponsored by the Greenlee School of Journalism and Communication, as well as the Political Science Department. Before we begin with tonight's presentation, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you all of some upcoming events. This Wednesday at 8 o'clock in this room, we have The Patriot Act in Iowa by Charles Larson Sr., Stephen O'Mara, and Ben Stone. Followed this Thursday at 8 o'clock in this room is The Bill of Rights in Jeopardy, a presentation by Nadine Strawson. I would now like to take this opportunity to introduce Josh Reich, who will introduce our distinguished guest. Josh?
Tonight's speaker is an ardent defender of gun owners' rights, he's also been an ardent defender of civil liberties in general. During his long and distinguished career, he has served in top management positions within the Republican Party. He served as the chairman of the Republican Party of Iowa in the year 2000 and organized the Iowa Straw Poll, which brought 50,000 people into Ames and into Hilton Coliseum in general. He's retired as the assistant chief of police for Des Moines, and that was among his 33 years he served in law enforcement. He also served in the Marine Corps and was a decorated veteran in Vietnam. He has also led many of the presidential campaigns in Iowa on the Republican side. He led Bob Dole's campaign in 1988, and also Phil Graham's campaign in 1996. He's also a certified firearms instructor, and he's also an Iowa State police pistol champion. And before I get into, I'm reading off this sheet here, I guess I could do a little bit more ad lib. We ate dinner a little bit earlier, and we ate with Kara, who's the president of the local ACLU here at our college. And I was always, I hope now that, because Kara has had a chance to meet him firsthand, the American Civil Liberties Union, who defends civil liberty so ardently on our campus, can start to work with the NRA firsthand, and they can hand in hand help defend gun owners' rights. So, Kara, it starts tonight. We're going to start doing that. But he succeeded Charlton Heston as the president of the National Rifle Association in April 2003. Ladies and gentlemen, Kane Robinson.
Actually, as I will mention in a couple of minutes, we do quite a few things with the American Civil Liberties Union. National Rifle Association is the largest and oldest civil rights organization in America. That's really our main function. We have about 4 million members. We produce about 60 million magazines and publications a year, and conduct about 12,000 shooting tournaments. So we're all over the country, but the main thing we do is become involved in civil rights, not only the Second Amendment, but as you will hear as I talk, quite a few others. I'm going to talk about things that are mostly outside of the purview of the Second Amendment tonight, civil rights in general, because I think there's a certain amount of danger to our civil rights that always occurs when you have national crises, like the rather strange military situation that we have going on now, where we don't have an enemy like Germany or Japan or some traditional country that we have fought in previous wars, but is a diffuse kind of a strange thing all over the world. And it lends itself to the necessity for government to do a lot of bizarre things in order to be successful. The danger is that those bizarre things become institutionalized, go beyond the military necessity of the moment, and start eating away at our civil rights. Once they're gone, very, very difficult to get back. In addition to that, from the standpoint of those of us that are involved with firearms, we find we're mixed up in a cultural war. If you think of those blue states and the red states in the 2000 election, that sort of describes the various sides. It's far oversimplistic, but it kind of describes the way that cultural war is waged. There are people in the blue states that are rather contemptuous of those of us that are in the red states. And again, it's a great oversimplification, but that's the way it works. They're also contemptuous of some of the people in their own megacities in the blue states, like the people that belong to unions and that make things and drive trucks and and do a lot of work with their hands, they're sort of on the outs. They're not socially acceptable at the country club. One of the characteristics of the people that are disliked by the blue states are people that own guns. They're terrible people. The elite in this cultural war want to stamp out all of the characteristics associated with gun ownership. There are about 80 million gun owners in America, about 16 million hunters, 4 million NRA members. Turns out there's a lot more of us than there is of them, so we're not too worried about what they're liable to do. But a problem for everybody, including all of you in this room, is the implications of this cultural war on our civil rights. Owning guns specifically brings to mind quite a civil rights crisis. I'd like to read a quote from a noted liberal attorney that brings this into pretty sharp relief. Alan Dershowitz. Foolish liberals who are trying to read the Second Amendment out of the Constitution by claiming it's not an individual right or that it's too much of a safety hazard don't see the danger of the big picture. They're courting disaster by encouraging others to use the same means to eliminate portions of the Constitution they don't like. Now, it's not unusual that our rights are trampled to solve some pet hate of the moment. The dope war is a good one that we're all familiar with. It's been used to inflict rather significant damage on our Constitution. I don't like dope, I don't use dope, but in the name of the drug war, we've done a lot of bizarre things. We are right now talking about banning very commonly used things, medicines and other things, because some criminal may take those things and use them to make methamphetamine. We have institutionalized no-knock search warrants, which heretofore, till the dope war came along, they were unheard of. The idea that the first thing you see is the barrel of a shotgun when a police officer kicks down your door. Routine search warrants based on criminal informants. Now, those things used to be uncommon, unusual. They're very, very common now. In fact, most search warrants, by a country mile, most search warrants are warrants that are based solely on the word of a criminal informant. And that's because of the necessities of conducting drug investigations. You front in a drug dealer or buyer, makes a buy, comes out, and the police officer then gets a warrant based on the sworn testimony, which never appears in court, of a confidential informant. The problem is that that's very difficult for a police department to manage. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do. I'm saying that there's a warning sign when we've institutionalized that to where most search warrants in America are based on confidential informants. Pretty dangerous proposition, and any police manager will tell you that those things are very, very hard to supervise. You're conducting this whole thing based on the statement, the word of a criminal. Making people take a leak in a bottle because the drug war has become institutionalized. We'd have never thought about that before. It's going pretty far, isn't it? And yes, drugs can do horrible things. People working in critical jobs, if your brain surgeon's going to work on you, you don't want him to be drunk. I appreciate that. But look how far we've gone with all of this now. It's becoming routine to ask employees in various companies to take a leak in a bottle. In the name of doing something about drunk drivers, to catch a few drunks driving, in many cities they stop and hassle huge numbers of drivers on the theory that by stopping everybody they'll scare a few drunks away. Your papers are not in order. You know, that sounds like something that would be done in another country, not in America. Putting up roadblocks, stopping people, check and see if they're obeying the law. Traffic accidents. We are now seeing all the new cars have a chip in them. And that little chip is like a cockpit voice recorder, a cockpit data recorder in an airplane. It has all kinds of neat information in it. And what happens when you get into an accident, if the police officer thinks that there may be some wrongdoing, he can subpoena that little chip. It's being done constantly in cases all over America now. you have a little tattletale in your car to testify against you everywhere you go. These things cumulatively add up to a big brother that's a lot bigger than George Orwell would have ever thought. These agencies get out of control with it. Remember Richard Jewell, poor little Richard Jewell. He was a little fuzzy security guard, and the FBI got the idea that he'd bombed someplace. And they pursued him relentlessly, smeared him, ruined his life. And it turned out that little Richard Jewell didn't have anything to do with it. They're doing the same thing now with another guy, Stephen Hatfill, this doctor that may be the guy that sent the anthrax to the Senate office buildings, and he may not be. We don't know. But they've completely blacklisted him around the country by having 24-hour tails following him around and spectacularly identifying him. And they have no evidence, apparently. Now, if he did it, okay, we ought to arrest him. We ought to put him in jail. I don't care if we chop his head off. But if he didn't do it, pretty big risk in those kind of tactics. And they can be used against a lot of people. Here's just some guy that's a doctor that happened to be in the business of dealing with biological agents. Terrorism is the key to opening the door to a large number of abuses and invasions. Whether they're abuses, I guess we're not going to know until another year or two has passed. But I'm a little alarmed when I go to the airport, and I travel almost every day, and I see people that look just like all of you in this room, forced to stand up in public with your arms outstretched while someone searches you. Yes, I know we don't want terrorists to get on the airplane with weapons and things like that, but just think about that for a minute. In 33 years as a police officer, I could not have stopped any of you without probable cause and had you stand out there and stretch your arms out. I could have stayed outside of a dope den in Des Moines, and I couldn't have stopped somebody coming out of that and made him stand there and stretch his arms out while I searched him in front of other people for the specific purpose of creating the impression with the other people that two things are true. One is, if you're a terrorist, be careful because they're going to search you. These are the two purposes of this thing. And secondly, all the people that travel every other year or so are supposed to feel safe because they see all that being done. Those are the two purposes of those searches. They have nothing to do with finding anything. Nobody believes that a bomber is going to come. It's like the questions they used to have about a year ago when you went to the airport and they said, did you pack your own luggage? And they had these trick questions. How can you see Osama bin Laden coming up to the thing and say, oh, you got me with the trick question. Oh, my goodness. Yes, I confess. I'm going to... It's kind of pitiful, and of course there are measures that have been effective. The sky marshals putting cockpit doors. I think even the armed pilots program, probably more important, has been the intelligence work that's been done to try and find what some of these outfits are doing. But the whole idea of institutionalizing the massive public searches of Americans is something that we ought to keep our eye on. I'm not sure that it's a good trend, even though in an emergency of the moment it might be necessary. Traffic violations all over America with very little objection from Americans. Cities are putting up cameras, and if you go through a light in a certain way, they send you a traffic ticket. And you know what else they're doing? I'm in the police business. I'll tell you what they're doing. All over America, they're shortening the yellow lights because the cities know that if they shorten the yellow lights, their revenue goes way up. These things are massive revenue producers, and they just love them. And so they take a picture of your car and a picture of your face, and they send you a traffic ticket in the mail. Isn't that cute? But they're able to take the criminal justice system, which is what this is, because if you don't pay it, you'll see a warrant will come for your arrest. And by manipulating the yellow light, they know they can capture more fine income. Is that a use of our criminal justice system? What about that? That doesn't sound too neat to me. Free speech. Some may not like this one. Increasingly on campuses, politically correct speech has become a sort of a tyranny. People have to watch everything they say right here at this college, at this university. I knew some time ago one of the top executives who told me that if it were known that that person was a member of NRA, which the person was, owned firearms, which the person did, and some of the other similar activities, actually shot in competition some years ago, that their career would have been ruined. This person was absolutely convinced, doesn't have work here anymore, but that's not uncommon. It's not uncommon at all that the persons that they worked with would have so ostracized them, that would have been so shocking and so much of an aberration that they could not have been successful on this college, this university. It's paid for by the people of Iowa, that has over 1 million gun owners in it. A very interesting concept. What about our constitutional rights? The Second Amendment, why was it put in the Constitution? I'm not going to elaborate, but if you'll bear with me, I'd like to read one more little quote, which is a pretty good one, I think, from Hubert Humphrey, who was an NRA life member and who knew something about the Second Amendment. And this is the way he described it. The right of citizens to keep and bear arms is just one more guarantee against arbitrary government, one more safeguard against the tyranny which now appears remote in America, but which historically has proven to be always possible. Whether you study the Second Amendment or other things is your affair, but it is in the Constitution. And this whole business of disregarding our civil rights is pretty important. For some people, it's great sport to try and invade the other guy's rights. Great fun. But sooner rather than later, we all find those chickens come home to roost, and the rights that we cherish get invaded and get swept away. Guns are simply part of this little cultural war we're in. The war has nothing to do with crime, has nothing to do with safety. When people are killed where any other object is involved, airplanes, cars, gas, explosions, knives, arson, skiing, swimming pools, ladders, accident or murder, there's never a bill in the legislature, never any propaganda to ban any of those things. Only guns. The difference is, it's the politics. It has nothing to do with the crime, it has nothing to do with the safety, it has nothing to do even with the deaths. Let's take a quick look at the propaganda, and then I'll move on to some other things. Crime. Let's consider two places of equal size, 600,000, a congressional district. Washington, D.C., corporate Washington, D.C. has 600,000 people in it. It's a total government city. Everything is planned and run by the government. Huge, endless supply of money from the federal government. Welfare is a lifestyle. There's more law enforcement per capita than any other city in America. You have public housing, wonderful tenement buildings like in Moscow. It's the most expensive and worst education system in America. And guns are banned. Hardly any home in Washington has a gun. Only a relatively few criminals have the guns. South Dakota. South Dakota has 600,000 people, same population. Has very little government, few restrictive laws, very low per capita income, below average influx of federal dollars, very hard to get on welfare, very few people on welfare, very few police per capita, hardly any public housing, low spending on education, but among the top 5 education systems in America, and virtually no gun laws. Every house in South Dakota has a gun. Washington, D.C., only criminals have guns. They have the highest murder rate in America. South Dakota, virtually everybody owns a gun, and they have the lowest crime rate in America. Washington, D.C.'s homicide rate is 40 times that of South Dakota. Now, it may not be the lack of guns in Washington, D.C. That has resulted in their high murder rate, but it's certainly not the presence of guns in South Dakota that's caused crime, because if it has been, there isn't very much crime. It's not surprising. You could find the same thing here in Iowa if you take a cookie cutter and take 1 million people or 2 million people and put the cookie cutter over them and find another one of those cities that no one owns a gun in and makes a comparison. You'll find that there are cultural differences. There are many, many differences. The presence or absence of a gun is not the thing that's associated with crime. You've heard a lot about safety. I venture to say virtually all of it's false as regards guns. The truth is that accidental deaths involving guns are way down. They're at an historic low, a 50-year low. Children 14 and under. You should look all this up in the National Safety Council stuff. It's not NRA stuff, it's National Safety Council. In Iowa, in a typical year, either 0 or 1 child is killed in a gun accident. 0 or 1. Now, many people would like to enact laws in the legislature to reduce those figures. Well, anybody that has anything to do with statistics would know it's pretty hard to reduce number 1 to 0 in a population of 3 million, or 0 to a lower number. In the whole United States, 72 children, 14 and under, that's the definition of a child, 14 and under, 72, the last figure that we have, killed in a firearms accident. Now, those are tragedies, no question about it, but the propaganda of the gun ban people would lead you to believe that children are stacked up like cordwood being killed with guns. And you probably understand that if you compare it to anything else, swimming pools, ladders, anything else that you want, far, 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 far more people, children and other people, are killed in accidents involving those objects. In the whole United States, all gun accidents, all populations, latest figure 802. So maybe you're being lied to. Maybe it really isn't that people are being slaughtered by firearms. Maybe there's some criminal interaction. Maybe some people commit suicide. But gun accidents are not a meaningful cause of death when you compare it to all the other things that happen to people in tragedies. It's an excuse to try and ban guns, an excuse to try and convince people that all kind of horrible safety measures are necessary, when the real reason for those safety measures is to make guns more expensive and harder to get and harder to use, in the hope that they can reduce that 80 million gun owners to some politically manageable number. Gun shows. Interesting thing about gun shows, we look at gun shows as the right to assemble. Des Moines has a gun show about every other month. 5,000 people a day in the Des Moines Gun Show. To my knowledge, there's never been a crime. There has, for sure, never been anybody shot. Yet there's 5,000 people, and there's many more guns than that there. But if you walk around, you find friends, people you know there. You find senators and congressmen and governors and legislators and bankers and butchers and bakers and candlestick makers. I guess I've never seen a candlestick maker, actually. Scares the hell out of the elitist snobs. They really don't like it, but the guns aren't the problem. What they really don't like is the political operation that goes on there. It's gun owners interacting with one another and looking at candidates and talking about how to protect their rights. That's the biggest activity that goes on at a gun show. Well, the Republican or the Democrat convention in Polk County, the county convention, or even the state convention, will probably not have 5,000 people attend it. Yet every other month, there will be a convention at the Des Moines Gun Show with 5,000 people. That's what scares the elitists, and that's why they want to stamp out gun shows. And the way they do it is they create all kind of rules that will make them financially unviable, where you can't conduct one and make a living at it, and that will stamp them out. And that's the purpose of most of the legislation that you've seen. There are no crimes. The rules for buying a gun at a gun show are exactly the same as the rules in any other part of your life. If you're a gun dealer, you do all the things that you have to do at your store. If you're a private person selling a gun, you have to behave exactly as a private person selling a gun in any other circumstance. There's no loophole. It's exactly the same law. It's exactly the same rules everywhere for everyone. So, as gun owners, we have a pretty good taste of civil rights abuse. It leads us to an important principle that we try to practice. Never give any government a power that you'd be nervous about giving to your worst political enemy. Why? Because if you just wait an election cycle or two, your worst political enemy will be in office. Remember this, that at any given time, some group, maybe some of you in this room, maybe me, Some group's worst political enemy is in power. The question is, when will it be your turn in the barrel? And that's why this whole business of civil rights is so important, and protecting the other guy's rights, even if you're not just crazy about them. Your turn in the barrel is going to come. You could all do an advanced degree program on all the abuses by government. Specifically, abuses by the people that are momentarily in control of federal or state government. The way that they use their office against opponents. It always happens. It happens in every administration. Some are worse than others, but it always happens. You'll find literally hundreds of abuses using powers that seem sensible to grant at the time and were very hard to speak out against at the time because of what's going on. 800 files of Americans during the Clinton administration came from the FBI. They landed on Craig Livingstone's desk. Craig Livingstone was a bartender who was the head of security for the White House. 800. Now, why they had all of those is interesting. Those were all people that had applied for jobs in previous administrations, and background investigations were done. Those all landed there because they were political enemies of the people that were in the White House at that moment. That set the standard. It told us what's going to happen with FBI files. And if you go back and look at the history of the FBI, you'll see that's not the first time those things have happened. They've happened over and over and over again. Doesn't mean it's a bad agency. Just means that if they hold records, the boss at some point will give an order and something will happen. That doesn't mean that the agent out in the field is no good. But it means that if they have all of these neat records, somebody will find a way to abuse them. There was a guy named Hansen in the FBI, sold information, got people killed for 22 years, a spy. In the Navy, the Walker family sold top secret crypto keys for years and years and years and got many Americans killed. So if you think that people won't use your information for money or to gain a political advantage, think again. They will. They do it all the time, and they'll continue to do it. The only people that are protected are people that are uninteresting, people that don't have any stake. Of course, that probably is most of us, that no one is really interested in what we're doing, and so no one's going to die on the sword to get our information. But if you think back of those cases that you know, you'll see this is a little more routine than we might like. Remember Daniel Ellsberg, his psychiatrist's office was burglarized in sort of a sneak and peek arrangement. We hear a lot about sneak and peek. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But somebody broke in, people that were working for the government broke in just to take a look and see what old Daniel Ellsberg was telling his psychiatrist. If a government record is kept, it'll be abused. Our most secret records have been abused in spectacular cases. Certainly lesser records are easier to abuse. So that tells us that we ought to be very sure that the value of the government gathering and possessing information about us is worth the risk before we agree to that. If a search can be conducted, a wiretapped, that power will be abused. It won't always be abused, but it will frequently be abused. Safeguards are virtually worthless. Remember that searches can be called many things. They can be called inspections and record checks and safety checks and license checks. So we should make very sure that the need to have personal sensitive information about us is very, very important before we voluntarily let the government make rules to keep it. Same thing is true of investigative agencies. Many of these agencies do great work, but they also possess one hell of a lot of information. And that information can be used to intimidate people. And it all depends on who's in power at any given moment, whether it will be so used or not. And the guarantees about these abuses that we get from agencies are useless. You're never given serious recourse. You're almost always prevented from suing the actual abuser. And the weak protections that do exist can easily be changed by Congress with a simple notwithstanding clause in the next law. There's never a contractual relationship that if you're information is abused, you have a claim on $1 million or something like that. They could be designed that way so that if your information is actually abused and released accidentally or on purpose, that you get $1 million. Then there'd be a stake in it. You'd have some standing. The way it works, it's a free shot. All somebody has to do is say, "Oops, I'm sorry, I promise never to do it again." So, it's pretty important that we be very parsimonious with what we let the government capture about us and how easy we let them get warrants to kick our door down. Poor Martha Stewart. Now, I don't know anything about Martha Stewart, but let's talk for 1 second about poor old Martha Stewart. She defended herself and said publicly that she didn't engage in insider trading. She isn't charged with insider trading because the government apparently can't prove that she did it. One of the charges against her is, incredibly, that she said she was innocent. And the rationale is that in saying that, she affected the price of her stock, and that that's a crime for her to have said that she was innocent and protect the price of her stock if she wasn't innocent of a crime that they haven't charged her with. I have a little trouble following that, but it's pretty frightening if you think about it. You're charged with something, you can't even defend yourself because it might affect the price of your stock. In her case, the stock plummeted, it went down, and they still charged her with this crime. Second charge is that she lied to federal agents when she said she did not engage in insider trading, a crime for which she is not charged, but it was a crime to tell the FBI agents that she didn't engage in insider trading even though they didn't charge her with it. Interesting. And it's a felony. Both of those are felonies. Now, there may be other charges I don't know a lot about, but the civil rights implications of those two are pretty interesting. I'm not sure I'd like to be charged in a situation like that. You couldn't even defend yourself because it might affect the value of your stock, and affecting the value of your stock, if you aren't telling the truth, is a crime, and they get to determine whether you're telling the truth. The Patriot Act. Somebody's going to talk about the Patriot Act here in a couple of days, and I'm not an expert on the Patriot Act. The kind of things I'm going to mention here really are the whole family of things that have been done in the name of the Patriot Act. There have been some things that were done in the years leading up to 9/11 and afterward, and then during that time in which this Patriot Act was passed. And it's actually a law that changes a whole bunch of other laws. If you were to read it, it doesn't make much sense because it says go into Title 18, Section 241 and change line 4 to so on. And it's full of that kind of stuff, so it's a little hard to follow. But the fact is that everybody in law enforcement knows exactly what happened with the Patriot Act. There were some things that were probably needed, like the ability to coordinate information between agencies. But then, all kind of federal law enforcement people got to the trough. And they all threw in the things that they wanted to get passed for years and years and years, but Congress wouldn't go along with because they were too invasive of civil rights. Well, this whole smorgasbord of stuff got passed because of 9/11. We don't yet know the implications of all of it, but it's a pretty big list. And so I'm combining those things, and it's all not technically the Patriot Act, but it's that family of laws that have been passed. One of the interesting things about it is that we've created a mentality about security that goes like this: what have you got to hide? That's the new standard. You should be embarrassed if you oppose this. What have you got to hide? What do you care if somebody looks at your records? What do you care if somebody looks at your medical records, your mental health records, or any of the other things that are out there, your finance information? What have you got to hide? That's the new standard. Interesting standard if you apply that to your lives. What do you read? What do you read in the libraries? All the things that you do, the new standard is, what have you got to hide? That sounds like a standard that's foreign to America. Associated with this is the business of roving wiretaps, not strictly in the Patriot Act, but part of that family. Now that sounds like an interesting thing because we know we've got cell phones, and the mafia goes out and uses the phone down on the corner, and so the rationale was that you couldn't just get one for the Don's house, you had to get one wherever the Don goes. And fine and dandy. Okay, that's wonderful. The problem is that if you want to tap anybody's phone, all you really have to do, if you're in federal law enforcement, is say that you have a confidential informant that says that there's some kind of an agent that's going to be at Valley West Mall, and so you get to tap every phone all around Valley West Mall. Your real target may well be somebody else. But all you got to do is say that you got a national security investigation going on in that area, and here's why it works. You're not going to arrest anybody in that case. You're just gathering information in something entirely different. But you say you got a national security investigation, you get the warrant for the wiretap, and you do it, you make the return is you didn't find anything. Neat. Nice deal. Because it's never going to be tested in court because you didn't arrest anybody with it. But you got to listen to the telephone conversations you really wanted to listen to, and you can use that information however you want. Just don't take it to court. What we have done with roving wiretaps is we've made it possible for federal law enforcement, and there are about 50 agencies, we've made it possible for any administration, and perhaps this one won't do it, perhaps the next one won't, to tap any phone in America with absolute impunity. It is a 100% open door, because all they've got to do is say they have some unrelated investigation going on and create the circle around your phone, the building you live in, the neighborhood you live in, and they can listen to your phone until their ears hurt, and when they're done, they simply go make a return on their warrant which says they didn't find anything. And that's the end of the story. But they've gotten what they wanted, and that may be good or may be bad. You may not care. I don't think it's a real good idea that the government can now listen to any telephone in America as often as they want. Sneak and peek warrants. You've heard about sneak and peek. Here's how it works. There's a little bitty clause in the law that says they can delay the return on a search warrant. That sounds innocent, right? If we're going to go do a search warrant, I may not want to give the guy an itemized list of what I did for a little while, maybe a week. That's not what it means. What it means is I get to send the FBI agent or whoever it happens to be in with a black bag job to pick the lock and go in and search the house. That's what it means. And I don't have to leave the paper there, which I otherwise have to leave, which is the information that tells the person that was the target of it that I've been there. That's what you have to do in the other warrants. I don't have to do that now. I can go in, I can search, I can do whatever I want, plant bugs or do whatever is I can get by with, and then I sneak out. Nobody knows I was there. And then later on, I have to make a return to the judge. Now, if I don't arrest the person based on that, my probable cause for that warrant will never be tested because it won't come up in court. And so, since the person doesn't know, the judge isn't going to care because I didn't find anything, I didn't arrest anybody, so it's never going to be tested. Interesting door we've opened, isn't it? Now, federal agents can come into your house when you're not there and sneak around and go through your stuff. Now, it's not going to happen probably to any of us in this room, me, any of you. But it's a step in the wrong direction. It just seems like a step in the wrong direction to me. Because if you think about all the other abuses, if you were going to do a nice big paper on all the abuses with all the administrations in modern times, how many times have political people sent police to do rather rotten things and gotten by with it? But how many cases do we know about? A lot. There have been books after book after book written about them. Well, we've now just given them permission to secretly break in our house, and we may never know about it. I'm going to tip over a couple things. We have an email system called Carnivore. They can read your email without a warrant. Very interesting. They vacuum up your email as it's going back and forth, put in keywords, and they kick out your emails. Echelon system that does the same thing with voice transmissions, routinely used now. One that I found frightening, and I think we got stopped a couple years ago, but it's cropping up again, has to do with public key crypto codes, the codes you use in your computers if you happen to use those, codes that banks use from their teller machines back and forth. Well, there was an attempt by federal law enforcement a couple of years ago to create a situation that if anybody, public key crypto cannot be broken. So far, no one has figured out a way to break it. Someday somebody will, but so far, they say it would take about 1 million years if all the computers in America went to work chewing on it. Whether that's true or not, I can't tell you, although I was in that business in the Marine Corps, and that'd be very interesting. In any event, what they wanted to do was anybody that had such a system, anybody that used that, which you can use in your own computers, if you had a system like that, you had to deposit a key with an escrow holder, so that the FBI or any other agency would have access to the key that would unlock the plain text messages that you were sending back and forth with anybody else. And the premise was why the mafia dons would be communicating with one another and all that, and we had to stop all that. And so anybody that made a crypto system had to produce a key for the FBI and other federal law enforcement agencies. Now, Congress balked at that and didn't pass it. I'm not thoroughly convinced that it hasn't snuck through somewhere, but most of the civil libertarians in Congress believe that it hasn't, and the companies say they don't have to deliver them up yet. But it's one to watch, because what it really means is that if you use one of those systems, communicate with somebody else over your computer, they would have to design them in such a way that there was a key, meaning a code, for unlocking all of your communications, and you can bet that it'll be abused. The CAPS-2 system is a computer-assisted passenger screening system. We all want to be safe on the airplanes, but let me tell you one problem with it. If you get identified, mistake, total mistake. You're a farmer, you've got some nitrogen fertilizer on your boot, just as you get in your car and come to the airport, you set the machine off. Or you go to the wrong country, or you're a writer and you access the wrong outfits on your internet and start setting off bells and whistles, and you get your name on this list, the CAPS-2 list. There's no way to get your name off. You can't challenge it. The law allowing that was specifically written to have no appeal. The premise for having no appeal was that if there was an appeal, then you would be able to find the sources and the methods and the things that the government used to put your name on it, and they didn't want to reveal that, which in the case of a confidential informant or something might make sense. The problem that they've created is there is no appeal. You can get caught in limbo. It hasn't been enacted yet. The law has been enacted, but they're just starting to use the system now. But there will probably be hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of Americans that will get caught in this thing. It's going to make a hell of a mess, because there'll be congressmen and senators and a lot of other people caught in it, and they'll start raising hell about it, and that may stop it. But that's the current status. If you're caught in that thing, you have no effective way of getting off. You can go get the slickest lawyer you want, and there's no place for them to go to have somebody say, well, this is why you're on there, and you say, well, that's not me. That's another guy with my name. You can't do it, and that means that you will either be prevented from getting on an airplane, or you will be wand raped about 100 times before you do get on. So, I'm nearing the end here. I've got two more things I want to mention to you. One of them happened right here in Iowa. Civil rights abuses, what we're talking about here. Planned Parenthood, July. They found a dead baby. And so the district attorney decided that he wanted to find out where that dead baby came from. And so he started issuing subpoenas. He had one of those Gestetner machines in his office, and he started cranking out subpoenas. And he subpoenaed Planned Parenthood, and he subpoenaed hospitals, and he subpoenaed clinics and everybody. I want you to give me all the records on everybody that was pregnant. Isn't that interesting? The district attorney can just start cranking them out and get all the medical records of anybody they want, because he's got a murder. Well, fortunately, in this case, the Iowa Supreme Court told him to get rid of his Gestetner machine, that they weren't going to go along with that. But it still serves as a pretty good example of how a zealous person who doesn't care about our rights and our privacy can crank up their Gestetner machine and get into our records. In another state with another Supreme Court, on another day, it might have been granted. It wasn't here. Now, I want to lastly tell you about a case that we were involved with the American Civil Liberties Union with. This was in a county that is unpronounceable in Virginia. The name of the county is Albemarle. Boy, I always have trouble with it. It's Albemarle, Albemarle County, Virginia. And there's a school there, a middle school, and there's a kid sitting at the lunch counter, and he's eating his lunch, and he has a T-shirt on. This T-shirt right here. And it says NRA Shooting Sports Camp on it. Okay, pretty innocuous, doesn't have anybody getting shot, it's not a garish thing, big bullet holes in it, nobody bleeding, nothing, just a shooting sports camp, which he happened to have attended. Kind of a simple thing. Okay. School vice principal came over and said, you got to take that off or you're suspended, you're out of here. The kid says, this is just my shooting sports shirt. You got to take it off or turn it inside out right now or you're out of here. Well, the kid turned it inside out. We went home, talked to his dad. His dad called National Rifle Association. We got a lot of lawyers. We got some really good lawyers. We got a lot of lawyers. Well, we went down to the United States Courthouse and we started filing a bunch of papers, and it turns out that it ended up at the 4th United States Circuit Court of Appeals. And the 4th United States